Okay. So what I want to do is sort of go back to the first chunk of slides and also these, and actually use an example, because it's when you're looking at this stuff, even when I'm thinking about them, I'm always thinking about it in terms of projects I'm working on or things we have worked on in the past. The Palolo project we're working on right now is entirely geographic. We'll get into that probably a little later. But I was just looking for something a little more off topic instead of something that I'm not actually working on, because I can, like every other specialist, I can get hip deep in that stuff and it's not useful for you guys. This seems like it might be a little more relevant in some ways. So again, looking at this idea that what you have on one hand is the way that geographers look at things, which is the way that people use the world around them, but also the way that people see the world around them, because in the way that they see the world around them, again, this idea of perception and reality, that shapes what they're going to see as legitimate or logical choices. So let's stop this one. I'm swinging back and forth because one of the other classes, when I was carrying multiple screens at the same time, Zoom suddenly got unhappy, so we'll do it this way. Okay, so here's, I don't think I can pause this thing. So, here's Koa Ridge. Koa Ridge is a real interesting and highly controversial project that was proposed, I believe, almost 20 years ago. Several times was failed in front of the land zoning board. It's a whole chunk of central Oahu, basically beyond Mililani. And the purpose was to put in, I believe, 5,600 or 7,500, something like that, between 5,000 and 7,000 homes. And eventually it got approval, I believe, about 8 or 10 years ago, under a fair amount of community opposition, because the area that this is being built on is prime agricultural land. So one of the main questions that came up is that if we're currently in this big issue about food sustainability, that Hawaii has to get in a situation where we produce more of our food locally. You've got some of the best agricultural land in the island of Oahu right here, and you're bulldozing that out and putting in a community. And once it's bulldozed out, you don't put a farm back in there. It's gone. You've destroyed the land. So this is a one-way street. So there was a big discussion between, especially the city and county of Honolulu on one hand, which didn't want the development. They wanted to keep it as agricultural lands, and the state of Hawaii, which wanted this as a residential subdivision. And the state won, not surprisingly. They usually do. So what we're looking at here is going to be sort of interesting, because I want you to look at not only what they're actually doing. In fact, to be honest, I'm not actually interested in what they're actually doing. What I want you to look at is how they're messaging this. Because when you sell something, this is especially true in Hawaii, and especially idea of homes or houses, you're selling perception. One of the fascinating aspects of this is Koa Ridge is a good example. The majority of people that buy a home in this subdivision will have put the money down for the home before there's even a bulldozer putting a hole in the ground. They will have paid a part of that house before anyone actually builds the house. If you buy condos here in Honolulu, and in fact, one of the examples we'll see is, if I can fish it up, will be the ad for the Ritz-Carlton Tower in Waikiki. That was completely paid for. In other words, you paid the complete price of the unit before they even started construction. So when the guy was building the building, every apartment in it had been bought already at prices up to $14 million. So that means the developer has all the money in the pocket. There's no risk attached to it because everything has already been purchased. So you have people dropping literally $10 million or more on something entirely based on what they think it's going to look like. They can't touch it. They can't see it. They can't walk through it. It's all based on a set of presentations, and they're sort of trusting the person building it to actually build it like they say it's going to look like. So when you look at it, it gives you an idea of how powerful perception is, especially here in Hawaii. I'd argue for a bunch of reasons. Perception dominates the way that we deal with things here, probably even more so than a lot of other locations. Tourism here in Hawaii is entirely based on perception. I'll show you a little bit of a video later on that. So when you're looking at this idea of perception, we usually talk about it in the case of Hawaii and related to tourism. Oftentimes, as we'll see with one of the videos here, the erroneous way that tourism paints where we live, and the sort of very different way it looks in a tourism ad versus the reality of what we live in. But this one's a little bit different because this is intended for the population, to a certain extent, it's intended for the population that lives here. There's some argument about how much of the Koa Ridge is actually intended for local residents versus new residents, people moving from other parts of, for example, the United States. And I'm not, but you know, you don't know. That's always been sort of a crapshoot in terms of what you're going to actually get. What we want to look at in this situation is you have to remember several things. Is one, Koa Ridge was built with a fair amount of community opposition, the fact that you're destroying land for the purpose of making homes. It wasn't an area like, say, Barber's Point. Kapolei, for example, I mean, I did some of the initial work down in Kapolei back in the 70s. That area, you know, it used to be an armpit. I mean, it simply was, it wasn't by accident they put the H power plant there. Campbell Industrial Park is not a scenic wonder of any place on the planet. It's very, very dry. It was largely kiawe and some grasses. You know, it was pretty, by Honolulu standards or Hawaii, Oahu standards, it was pretty unattractive. So putting a subdivision there really didn't develop any community opposition because you're also like, well, fine, you know, it's not serving much other function. It's never going to be good agricultural land, for example. This particular development is when you filled up the lands that no one was really worried about, the need for houses persisted. And so you start moving into areas where there's more of a dialogue between alternative choices that you could make with that same piece of land. Now it's really interesting if you look at, let's segue here into the homes bit. So if you notice some of this messaging, it's a really interesting phrase, the plant a koa tree which should live out its life in a native Hawaiian forest. I'm not sure exactly what that sort of means. It sounds sort of creepy to me, but their big spin on the idea that this is suburban instead of suburban, since suburban is oftentimes sort of a negative connotation here. Let's take a look at this. Wait, where's this? Which one's the smaller ones? Oh, I think this is that the bigger ones? Wait. I sort of like the same. I could have sworn last time I was in here, I was seeing different stuff. How come? Okay, well, we'll do this. Okay, I'll take this one as an example. Now, these are what they're putting in here. And here's the living area, so it gives you, square meters, square foot, and the whole 9 yards. If you look at the United States prior to the 1930s, a large part of the American population did not own the home they lived in. Home ownership was somewhat of an issue in the 19th century, but actually home ownership wasn't an issue. The ownership of land was a big issue. The huge movement of settlers from the eastern seaboard across what becomes the United States was all based on the idea that you could basically acquire land. And they still have this process. Weirdly enough, they're still in Hawaii, depending on the particular sections of property. You can still basically settle property. You can still do this in states like Idaho, Wyoming, Alaska. You can basically go and you can become a settler. You can take a piece of property and basically make it yours by working it. And this was basically the process by which the Anglo population moved across North America, was the settling of the land. So land ownership was the huge motivation for people moving to North America, both Canada and the United States. And it was the big motivation to move out of the urban areas to other parts, was to get that property. And oftentimes you'll see this in the word, for example, sweat equity. You move somewhere, you spend the time and effort to develop the land, and therefore it's now yours because you put the work into it. This is still a huge push in places like Brazil. The loss of the Amazonian rainforest is largely due to the pressure on urban Brazilians to get their butts out of town and move into an area where they can own land, just by virtue of their work versus having a lot of cash up front. So that ethos of owning property is absolutely central to the American system. In fact, it's in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. So it's one of the basic manifestos, if you would, of American society and the formation of the United States. By contrast, a huge proportion of the population in England, even today, doesn't own land and doesn't own their house. A very large proportion of the English population lives in places that they rent. So the European tradition wasn't land ownership. The European tradition wasn't owning a home. People that are wealthy owned property and owned homes, but most people didn't. In a lot of Europe, most people still don't. The movement and the migration to the United States, one of the huge draws, and also places like Canada, Australia, etc., was the potential for having something that you couldn't have back home. That only hit a certain part of the population. A lot of Brits were much more concerned about living in England and didn't think the idea that owning property was such a big deal. It wasn't worth the risk of going somewhere. So the United States is based on a different perceptual view of the land than Europe is. If you go to someplace like England, you find all these cute little villages and places like that. A lot of the structures, and this is also true in the rest of Europe, a lot of the buildings might be 300, 500, 600 years old. They've been in the same family, the same folks that live there for maybe 3, 5, 6 generations. And so what you've got is very long-term established communities, very complex social relationships. So in much of Europe, and especially true in places like Italy and rural areas of France and Germany, the same people live next to each other for, maybe a couple of 100 years, which means if you're part of that community, you grow up, you know everyone knows you. You've got a very close, almost in the United States, even closer than the family would be in many cases, relationship with the entire community. And that's what people really wanted in many parts of Europe. That's still what people want in 2020. In the American system, you've got an entirely different perception. I mean, the American system, it's the idea of self-worth and self-valuation, but the key here is the idea of self, the idea of individual. In that concept, what you're going to get is two things. One is because you're all individuals, you have to be successful yourself. You don't have a community. Secondly, is that because you're at a place where there's a bunch of people you don't know, you're all migrants. Very early on, the United States, and to a certain extent Canada, was formed an idea that most people are going to be bouncing around with people they don't know. So to a certain extent, if you live in the United States, you live among strangers. You don't have a sense of community like you would have in Europe, okay? Because you just historically don't have it. And if you're trying to be successful as an individual, that also means you're going to move. If you make more money, you'll move to a nicer house or a nicer neighborhood. And statistically, I'm sure the COVID's changed this, but apparently not too much. Americans stay in the same house for less than 4 years. Statistical norm in the United States over the last 40 years has been, I believe, 3.7 years in the same house. Then a family moves to another house. So in that sense, it's not the house next door, it's a house in another community. So if you're statistically a normal mainland American kid in Anglo-American society, Emily will have been in maybe, whatever they were. By the time she's graduated from high school, she will have been in maybe 4 or 5 different homes. And that's probably 4 or 5 different neighborhoods and almost guaranteed 4 or 5 different schools or even school districts. And in many cases, maybe 2 or 3 different states. Okay. If you work for Target or Walmart or any of the big mainland, retail chains, they generally limit their management staff to be in the same store for 4 years maximum. And in the same district, which here in Hawaii would be the entire state, you're limited till 7 years. Anything outside of that requires central management to okay it. Otherwise, you'll be transferred to another district in another state to, sort of expand your horizons, I guess, or whatever. I mean, I used to be in that environment. I've forgotten what the logic was. But intentionally what that meant is all of management was migratory. They were all nomads. They were always moving around from one location to another. So in that situation, if Madison's going to be successful and she's going to be corporate, she's not going to live in the same place. She's going to move from one place to another place because her very success is going to move her. And so if she's got a family she's raising, that family's going to move with her. And they're going to be purchasing different places. And so in that situation, any place they live in, on one hand, is sort of a home, but semantically, it's probably more accurately a house. Because if they just moved into a place 2 years ago and she's a successful, mid-level executive, she can figure that maybe in 3 years, they will have to pack up and move to another place. And if a significant other is successful, they might have to move before that. So what you've got is a population which isn't based in community. You're generally living among strangers, and those strangers will change because not only are you moving every 4 or 5 years, but everyone around you is moving at a random pattern all the time. I mean, the little sort of goofy, townhouse subdivision I live in right now, it only has like 20 units in it, and every 3 to 5 months, someone's left and someone's moved in. Now, some of the folks have been there for about 10 years, but that's sort of a local thing. The other folks are very migratory. They're just in and out all the time. There's always someone packing up something or a for sale sign up and someone's moving somewhere else. So in that context, that's very much a uniquely American type phenomenon. So in that context, if you're trying to sell you guys a house here, say we're trying to, for some reason, I'm Castle and Cook, I'm trying to sell you this house. What's one of the things I have to convince you of? Well, say you've got the money for it. If you're buying this place, given that statistical, if this were hypothetically in the mainland, if you're buying that Plan A place there on the left, you guys can see the website, Joe. If you're buying that Plan A place, what can I statistically guarantee that over half of you will have done within 5 years? In fact, you can sort of see it. If you decide you want to stay in the community, and we'll now say that we'll say that I'm now making twice as much as when I bought this place, and I'm stereotypically almost like a TV show American. What should I do if I'm now making twice as much money, but I want to stay in Nanea? Should I stay in this house? Whoa, there we go. What should I buy instead? Remember, I'm now making twice as much money as when I bought this place. Yeah, that's a weird looking house. What should I do?
Are you going to sell it?
Yeah, and what I buy instead? A bigger house. Now, why is that a big deal? Sorry, bad pun there. If I'm living in a world of strangers. So the people that, even that I interact with casually, I don't know them. I don't know much about them. And to be honest, I don't really care. It's not worth my time because within a couple of years, they're not going to be there anyway. It's going to be someone else. So why is, if I'm making twice as much money, why, man, that's an ugly house. Sorry. Why would I buy this sucker and sell this one?
Because you can rent it, correct?
No, too practical. Don't be practical here. Good answer, but too practical.
I don't know.
Okay, I've got strangers driving by. What do the strangers, if the strangers see me in this house, and now the strangers see me in this house, what are they going to assume? What's happened to me?
You have more money?
Yeah, I'm making more money. So buying a bigger house is a statement of your financial social success. And this is why if you make more money, one of the things you do is you classically sell where you live and you move to another place that's bigger. Okay. Now we'll say that it's me, my significant other, and the cat. So, you know, even in 1,300 feet, I mean, to be honest, I would rattle around in 1,300 feet. I could probably live in the garage. So that's more than enough space. Is that going to keep me from buying the bigger house? No. No, because the important thing is I want to show that all the work and time and effort that I put into working really hard and making more money has got to show a reward. And the reward, the largest piece of that reward, is the house I live in. Now, if I want to really upscale that, what I do is I sell this place, and if I'm making a lot more money, I then move to some place like Kahala or some other neighborhood like Aina, which is even more expensive, and I do the same thing. Might be the same house, but now my address is more expensive. Now, if you want to see this classically, one of the goofiest examples of this would be Beverly Hills in California. Okay. They have this really weird situation there where there's a couple of folks very cleverly went and took what originally were homes and they parceled them out into little 2 or 4 meter squares. So you can actually, and then you can actually rent those. So you can have a Beverly Hills address, even though the amount of property you got would be smaller than my desk. And the reason is the address makes it seem like you're somebody, even though in this case it's totally BS. It's you know, it's like It's like doing artwork on your Snapchat page. So it's but it works because most of the people you're interacting with are strangers. They're never going to know you. They're not going to know the reality of what the address is. Yeah, you live in the back of a van, down, I don't know, somewhere in South LA, but at least your address is Beverly Hills. So if you're only dealing with strangers, you can be pretty superficial about how you present yourself because they're never going to actually know who Emily is. So, if she's in this house, they're going to judge her only on what they actually see, which is the manifestations of this. Now, if you're in the European system, if you're in rural France or England or something like that, people be in pretty rad-ass houses. But in that situation, they don't care because the only people that are interested in the community around them. They grew up with those people know them. So no one gives a what your house looks like because they know you too well to pay any attention to your house. Okay. You guys are getting a little bit of that if you see the way people dress when they're doing Zoom sessions in classes. They're at home, and they'd sort of like, if we were having regular classes like last year, then people would go to some effort to look like something, especially for people they don't know. But if you're just hanging around by yourself, you can just sort of, do your normal, laid back whatever. And what difference does it make? Because you're only interacting with people you either see digitally or people already know you and they know you too well to be impressed by what you wear. So when you look at this type of a pressure to buy, to have a home, to escalate to bigger homes, is part and part of a process that's pretty uniquely North American. Canadians do it to a lesser extent, but they're still very much like US folks in that regard. Now, the weird side about that is if you're developing a subdivision like this, why don't you just have one type of home? Why don't you just build all the homes like this? And this, in fact, I would bet that this, I'm willing to guess that according to Coleridge, since I'm somewhat familiar with all this stuff, this would be called an entry-level home. It's like a lot of the places in Kapolei. So sorry, I'm going to pick on Emily again. So if Emily's successful and she's got a good job and she's grad from Chaminade and she's making some money, then this would be, and she decides, I want to have a home. I've worked really hard and this is my, this is my reward to myself for all the hard work I'm putting in working, 16 hours a day on my job. So she buys herself, this is her first home. So it's we call an entry-level home. Now, why is Castle and Cook intentionally going to have different sizes of homes here? What do they really want Emily to do? Well, there's a big one.
Isn't it to upgrade homes?
Yeah, they would really rather that you upgrade homes in here. So what they want you to do is when you're walking down the street, you're walking your dog or your cat or your kid or whatever the hell you're walking down the street. You're walking down the street, they want you to look at this one and go, damn, if I get the promotion or my new IP comes through, this is what I'm going to buy. I'm going to sell this sucker. Now, what they don't want you to do is to sell this and move somewhere else, i.e. some other part of the island or something like that, because then they lose out. What they really want you to do is stay here, but move around as you become more successful to more upscale areas so they can charge more, they make more money out of it. Now, if that's going to be the case, if Emily's now moved here, what's the problem the developer has with this house, which is now empty with a for sale sign on it? What's the problem they're going to have selling this? Well, it's not really a problem. Who are they going to have to sell it to? Because remember, this is a starter home. So who are they going to have to look for? What type of person are they going to have to look for to sell this to? And there's actually a standard phrase for this, which I suspect would include all of you guys, because I don't think any of you probably own a home. I mean, I don't own a home, so I don't know why you guys would. To be a first-time home buyer. So they constantly need a new influx of people who want to get into owning a home to replace successful folks like Emily who are now moving through the system. The last thing they want is someone like Madison or someone like that who's decided, No, I mean, I'm not interested in owning a home. I'm just going to rent a place. Because then they're shafted. You don't, these type of places can't be rented per se, and the fact that that's not someone engaged in the process, which is home ownership. So this requires a mental logic. You have to have the perception that home ownership is worth working really long and hard hours, basically forever, to have a piece of paper that says this is yours. And then you have to not only buy into this, you have to buy into the fact that even though we'll say Emily's just, it's her significant other and herself and a dog, she doesn't need 1,600 square feet. She doesn't need this big of a house, but you've got to have her convinced that as she becomes more successful, this is why she should put more hours into the job. This is why she should go for that promotion. This is why she should do this, that, and the other thing is that she really needs to have this. Mind you, in terms of actual comfort, it might not be any more comfortable than this house. It sure is a hell of a lot more trouble to clean. But nonetheless, you've got to get her convinced that she buys into the whole cycle. So notice how perception is absolutely key. None of this thing here works unless you buy the perceptual package that this stuff is necessary. Now to do that again, let's see, which one was that? I think it was this one. Yeah. This is great. I mean, Castle and Cook has never been known for subtle advertising. In fact, I think realtors generally aren't, and subdivision developers generally aren't. This is their top image for lifestyle. What are they very clearly saying is going to happen if you buy a home at Coa Ridge? What do you see in this picture? Describe this to me.
You'll be happy.
Okay, you'll be happy. Who's going to be happy? You're exactly right.
Smaller families.
Yeah, and notice the age. Somewhat,
Younger, smaller families.
Yeah, older than you guys, but not fossilized yet. Yeah,
Mm.
and with one kid, one fairly small munchkin. Okay, and notice how they look fairly sophisticated but pretty casual. Da 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 da. In a weird way, what don't you see in this image? It's sort of a trick question, but it's not.
You don't see other people?
Yeah, you don't see other people, and of course you don't see a house. I think this is supposed to be some sort of a shopping center. But since they haven't built it, guess what? This isn't their shopping center because it ain't built yet. So they took this somewhere else. So yeah, you don't actually have what they're buying. You have the idea that, they're happy, everyone's smiling. I can guarantee these are models that are, doing this. There was a lot of work and agonizing going into the colors that they wear, the things that they have on them. And these things are absolutely fascinating because they want this message to be so clear that Aloha or someone else will just look at this and they'll go, that could be me. They don't want you to look at it and actually analyze it. They want to sort of like suck you in and grab you. And that's classic advertising. So notice how you do sort of a neo-Hawaiian tatau here, graphic down in the corner to imply that it's a Hawaiian subdivision versus somewhere else. The outfits that they've got, it's too tacky in 2020 for him to be wearing an Aloha shirt. And it's too tacky for it to be in a tucked in Aloha shirt, which would be 10 or 15 years ago. So he's got to look a little more casual, like maybe he's in IT or something like that, where he's making some bucks. And she's looking like someone who might be a professional, might not. You can actually write up this whole weird biography. You can write the entire family history of these folks by virtue of the way they're imaged here. Not the least of which is he's carrying a bag, which means they've got money to buy stuff. Okay. Then you've got this one. Now, why did they do this piece of artwork? What couldn't they do? They couldn't
get a real photo.
Yeah, they couldn't get a real photo because it ain't there. And if it was Photoshopped, it'd probably be too obvious and probably wouldn't be quite legal. So they do the sketch. Again, in this one, notice what they're doing. Look at the way they've got people doing stuff. Notice how everyone's socializing, everyone's engaging here. This is the great American fantasy. Americans don't live in communities. That's Europe or Asia. The places in Japan that I've studied, those are communities. Even in Tokyo, it's a set of communities that just happens to be one of the world's largest cities. When we do our work in central China, it's all communities. People know everyone around them, and you basically have no privacy. Americans dream of the life where you know your neighbors and you're friends with them. But the reality is most Americans don't really want that. What they wanted is when they want to be able to go to some place this and socialize, and then they want to be able to turn it off and go home and do whatever else they want to. So they don't want the realities of a real community. They want like a Disneyland community, something that you can go to, pay a few bucks, and it happens to you, get all the satisfaction of it, but you don't have any effort involved. You know, if Josiah is classically part of what this is marketing to, they don't want him to want his own life. They want him to have a life where it's always, you know, what can you do for your friends and neighbors? What are they going to do for you? And you guys are sort of in each other's backyards all the time. The reality is Americans don't actually want that, most of them. But nonetheless, this is what you market. This is the idea of community. And this is why they came up with this weird, goofy, half-assed word, suburban. Okay? Urban and suburban. Suburban with the idea of urban part being that you always got people to hang around and there's always something to do. You know, this is one of the huge issues with COVID, you know, is there's nothing to do. And so people are frequently breaking the rules and doing stuff in groups because they want to do something. Notice if this place were anything like what they want it to be, it's very attractive, it's very colorful, there's stuff going on. If Emily or, I already picked on Emily, if Aloha or someone else is running around, they got nothing to do, they come down here, there'll be exciting stuff happening. If you want to see people and talk to people, boom, it'll just happen like that. And you've paid for that by buying the house. So in the modern American context of the 21st century, you buy a piece of property, you buy a structure, and with it you buy a lifestyle. And it's a package deal. And there's always things to do. You don't have to think about, oh, it's, you know, it's Monday and it's Labor Day and I got nothing to do. Not here. Here there's always stuff to do. There's always things to do, people to get excited, da 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 da. Okay. And of course, it being Hawaii in a rather not too very subtle sort of pseudo-Hawaiian context. Okay. So again, here we go. Hey, wait, isn't that a different lady? What else to say? Sorry, I was just wondering there for a second. You know, so notice how you're again marketing healthy activities, walking, but notice again, you don't see any houses. This one, I'm not sure what that's supposed to be about this sort of houses. So what you have is a lifestyle. You buy a lifestyle that just is going to cost you, you know, maybe $400,000 to $700,000 for all the generations. So perceptions selling a reality that hasn't been built yet. Now, what's going to be the scary thing for the developer? We'll say that you guys have all porked out your money and you've all bought a place. What are you waiting to have happen?
All of what they're promising.
Yeah. Yeah. If you think about it, if you're a developer, how the hell do you promise people are going to have a good time at a sort of a pseudo halal event? How are you going to guarantee that people are going to hang around and be friendly with their neighbors? You can't. But if you don't do it, you can actually get sued in the United States. If this is part of what's called the amenities, the developers have to make a good faith attempt to make this happen, or else you can sue them for the cost of your house, that it was false promises. So when you're looking at all this type of stuff, it's a classic example of what geographers look at, because if you think about it, what you've got here is a built environment. This is a cultural landscape in this image. There's the greenery. There's the hint that it's in Hawaii. There's the earth tone colors. There's the sort of vague palm tree in the background. There's the colors that they're wearing, all of which pretty clearly sort of suggest they're not on the mainland. And of course, these folks are sort of local looking. So it's sort of, again, just suggests you're not on the mainland. Now, if this was marketed for mainland folks, what would be different in this picture? If it was still this development, if Castle and Cook decides they're going to sell Coral Ridge to folks from Denver, Colorado, how are they going to change it? Rather cynically. They're only going to change one thing that I can think of.
Wouldn't it be the clothing? Like, I guess make it more like, how can I describe it? Like a luau theme Hawaiian.
Okay, yeah, one would be the clothing. More importantly, it's something related to the clothing. More so the guy than the lady. The lady you might keep. Why are you going to change the kid and the guy? What are you going to switch them out for?
More formal clothing?
Nope, nope. You're going to switch out to folks a little more howly.
Uh,
Because you folks from the mainland who are going to be large Anglo-American that are going to be buying into this thing, they're going to have a comfort level. There's going to be a large chunk of the population at least looks like they do. So you can keep one of them as being sort of ethnic, because that implies that it's a sophisticated multicultural, destination. But you wouldn't want the whole group to look non-Anglo. Otherwise, your Anglo population is going to go, I don't know, that might be sort of a hassle. And you see this a lot when you look at ads related to Hawaii of people doing stuff. In fact, maybe we can see this here. Let's see if this works. I never tried doing a video on this. Can you guys see this? Oops, wait, no, you can't. I feel it's probably gonna blow the system, but let's see if it works. Can you guys see this, YouTube? Okay.
Cool is Hawaii Island? Well, lava chasing is actually a thing here. Try it when you visit Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. With so many unique and magical experiences here, you may just have to make more than one trip. Oahu, Maui, Kauai, and Hawaii Island. Everyone's got their favorite, and the best way to know is to go. In Hawaii, it all comes down to what kind of perfect are you looking for?
Now, think about it for a second. How did they what was that last slogan? Did you pick that up? What type of perfect are you looking for? Now, why does that put an enormous amount of pressure if you're in the tourism business here? What's the scary thing about, what's the scary thing about the word perfect?
You're saying every tourist that goes to Hawaii is going to have like the most perfect experience, but that's relative to each person. So you can't define perfect for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, if for some reason I said, okay, we're gonna have the perfect class today, I can guarantee that you guys wouldn't agree with that. I mean, don't take this wrong. I don't think today's class is perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm sure that Josiah or anyone else will go like, about the same time hell freezes over. So what you're going to have is you're trying to have something that's entirely a value judgment. I mean, perfect is about as scary a word as you can think of. If you're trying to imply, if you pay money, you're going to get something that's perfect. When you think about it, whoever wrote this thing should have been shot. It's like the worst possible thing you could have brought up as a slogan. Now, we'll say that Aloha is actually in charge of, what are these people doing back here? Oh, okay. This is a perfect example. Well, sorry, bad pun there. What's the problem with a perfect kayak experience? As someone who owns a boat. We'll say that all these folks have never been on anything before, and a fair number of them don't look like they've ever been in a kayak before, so that's probably pretty close. What's the problem if Aloha's in charge of setting this up, and she's been told that this has to be perfect for all of them? What can you almost guarantee that's going to happen with at least one or two of these folks by the time they've been on the water for 10 minutes? Remember, this is the ocean. So what does the ocean do? Okay. That's not going to be quite so bad because they're in kayaks, so there's actually a little less motion, but this is going to be moving all over the place. So we'll say
wipe out.
Yeah. Well, they're going to start feeding the fish. She's going to get seasick, and her husband over here maybe isn't much better, and she starts to get a bad case of the upchucks. She starts to do that, and I guarantee you, someone else is going to throw up. And pretty soon that perfect experience has gone completely upside down. Now you could ask them before, do you get seasick? And they're going to go, no, but guess what? They've never been on the ocean before. So they have no idea what the hell you're talking about. If you ask them, do they car sick might work, but notice how in this situation then, if you're trying to make this perfect, we'll say also, since these folks, a lot of them are probably from someplace that doesn't get a lot, we'll say it's not near as sunny. So we'll say if this is this month, and this is, I'm not sure where this is, to be honest. It almost looks like Molokai, but I'm sure it's not. So we'll say this is Kualoa. It's not, but we'll say it's around Kualoa. So it's about right this morning or today right now at 1 o'clock, it's probably about 92 degrees out. Sun, UV level's probably somewhere around 1,000 or whatever the highest level is. What can you guarantee is going to happen to these folks after a couple hours out in the water? They're
They
going
might
to be,
get tired of paddling. I don't know.
yeah. For one thing, if they've never done this before, trust me, running a kayak, especially with two pretty chunky people in it, that ain't exactly, you don't go zipping on the water. You know, if the wind picks up and the current's going the other direction, in a sudden panic, they can find themselves going the opposite direction to home. And they're going to get really hyper really fast. I don't see anyone here with a motor. So if they're smart, they probably got, they got someone like Aloha or someone's running around, she's got a jet ski or something, she can tow people in if she has to. The other thing is they're going to get sunburned. They probably didn't bring, she's got water, but a lot of them probably didn't bring enough water. So what they've got is pretty soon this turns into an adventure, but the word perfect might not be in that lexicon anymore. So when you're trying to do things that are perfect, and when you set up a place as being perfect, you're setting yourself up for a fail, because I can guarantee that no two of these people, even the ones if these are spouses here, neither of them are going to agree on what the word perfect means. And no way that you're going to set up something that they're all going to think is, quote, perfect, unquote. So when you're looking at this whole idea of perception, if you're marketing Hawaii as being a place where you can actually use the word perfect, you're really setting a place up, but you're also putting a massive amount of expectations on it. And that has both a plus and a minus. Now in this, if you notice, given the fact that they were just talking about the different islands, with the exception of that one shot of Waikiki, what's the common factor with all these images that I'm flipping to, with the exception of this one?
It's all green and beautiful landscapes.
Yeah, or else really exotic, like Haleakala. Yeah. So what the impression is how many locals do you see in these pictures? To be honest, I haven't even watched the rest of that, so I have no idea what I'm actually doing here. Notice how what you see is something that maybe Captain Cook might have seen in 1778. But this certainly doesn't look like the island of Oahu. And it doesn't look like the reality that you guys deal with living here. So what you're doing is you're packaging a fiction, you're packaging a fantasy, and that's what you sell. And as we'll see later in the semester, that's actually what tourism is. Tourism is the selling of fantasy images to people that fulfill some need they have for that particular fantasy. It's not by accident that you see a bunch of canoes, long canoes here. So that sort of implies, again, the image of Hawaii. Canoes, hidden sort of residential places, beautiful beach, and a lot of palm trees. And the whole thing is green with a spectacular, sort of backdrop of mountains. What you're getting is the classic image of Hawaii. And that's what you market as a tourism audience. Now, in that situation, one of the things you're talking about is, of course, by next week or whatever, in a couple of weeks when they open up tourism, you'll start to have tourists come back. They're going to be on those sort of a version of the ankle bracelets that the judiciary uses. So you're going to fly to Oahu. You'll check into a hotel. You'll stay in that hotel, and you have to stay in the hotel, and you can't leave. In the sense that the system won't allow you to leave the property. It'll actually set off an alarm. So it's the same as those things you wear if you're on probation, which is basically if you leave a certain spot, it beeps, and they're going to come catch you and haul your ass back to your hotel room. So in that situation, what's the problem with marketing coming to Hawaii as a tourist in November 2020 with the way this ad looks?
They can't go outside.
Yeah, they can't do anything that's even in the ad, including even messing around down here. So one of the problems that folks like geographers have pointed out is even if you say you're going to start tourism back up, if the tourism doesn't include the very thing that the people are paying for, then it's just not going to happen, because people are not going to drop thousands of dollars to stay in a hotel room and not see paradise. So when you're looking at perception, perception drives an enormous amount of what we do. It drives why we live in houses. It drives why we go the places we go. It drives a multi-billion-dollar industry here in Hawaii that's stopped. And so, you know, right now with this whole issue of COVID, when people talk about restarting tourism, that's not just like you start it up and people are going to hop back and be comfortable in a hotel room looking at this stuff. They're going to want to engage with it. So it's a very complicated scenario, and geographers have been pointing out since this whole thing started is removing access but keeping isolation is not going to work because people just won't do it. Because if you're paying $3,000 or $4,000 for you and your family to come here, you want to be on the beach playing with your kid. You don't want to be sitting in a hotel room watching, you know, reruns on Netflix or something like that. You can do that at home and you can save yourself $3,000. So one of the paradoxes you get into is that images of place, images of Hawaii are almost invariably external images. They're exotic images, they're green images, they're water images, they're things like this. Other parts of the world, I don't know, maybe you could do a hotel stay and it might work, you know. So in some place like maybe Florence, Italy, I don't know, maybe as long as you could walk around part of the plaza, people would be okay with it. But here, it's just not, you know, it's just not a particularly functional idea when you actually think about it for a second. Okay, let's go back to here. Okay. Now, this sort of gets us, and again, Koa Ridge is a good example of the idea of regions. In fact, let's segue back. Well, let me go over the terms first. When you're talking about region, we mentioned a little bit when we're talking about sort of general terms. A region is basically some sort of a criteria using to define this area or this space in contrast to something else. Now, let's segue back to our Koa Ridge. This is just too good to keep on to avoid. Oops, sorry. Now, one of the interesting things about Koa Ridge, and I think they had the map. Was the map here? Yeah, okay, here we go. Koa Ridge is sort of based on the same concept as Kaka'ako, which we'll look at later in the semester. Notice they're talking about the amount of pathways they have here. Now, somewhere in here, where was it? Oh, here we go. Now, if you look at what they've got here, we call these, oftentimes these guys will call these amenities. So they've got a park. I don't know if that looks like basketball courts to me. Or is it supposed to be soccer fields? Probably supposed to be soccer fields. There's a school. Medical in case you get sick. There's a community center where people do stuff. And I assume that's probably the shopping center. Now, they've got a Costco over here. What do they really want the residents to do? This is actually, and see if you can figure this out, because this was the major selling point that Castle and Cooke used when they got permission to build this property. They said that they were going to not actually have any impact on traffic to the surrounding area. They argued that if they've set this up right, and this is where they're using the word suburban. On one hand, what you've got, and this doesn't zoom in, these are all homes. So in fact, this whole area is residential. So everything just lighted up is all residential. If you've got a shopping center here, if you've got a community center here, if you've got medical, a park, and a school and all this stuff, what did they argue to the state and city governments that they were gonna say that the people who live here, where are they gonna spend their time? Are they going to drive down and shop in Kapolei?
Just going to stay in that area.
Yeah. This is the new type of development in the United States in the last 20 years. Kaka'ako is probably the most famous here. The most money's been poured into an estimated, I believe it's now $40 billion in Kaka'ako total. We'll see that later. This is arguing the same thing. What you want to do is they're arguing they're actually going to decrease environmental impact, because what they want to do is have it so that the people living here will, and in fact, the slogan for Kaka'ako is shop, work, and play. So the same thing here. You'll live here, you'll shop there, you'll play there, and you'll go to school there. So what they've done is they've actually tried to design a subdivision that mimics a European or Asian community. And their argument is that people who live here will just do their stuff in this particular area. Now, having said that, sorry, I'm having trouble navigating across this. That's not the same one. There we go. If we go back to this basic idea, which is also part of their design, which is that people that build in this home aren't supposed to be satisfied. It's sort of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. The porridge is either too hot or the porridge is too cold. So you're always going to move and upscale to another place. If that's true, if people are moving in and moving out, then what happens to the community plan? What part doesn't fit? It's like a part of a puzzle that's missing, or someone put in a part from another puzzle. We'll say that this section over here is the cheap seats. This is the entry homes. If everyone's moving out of those within 5 years and moving to other places, either in other parts here or other communities, so you got a constant influx of people moving out, people moving in, people moving out, people moving in. What does this do to the idea of community?
It destroys it because everyone's moving, so there's not going to be like a set community that's stagnant there.
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. I mean, stagnant is a bad word in American English, I guess, but in this case, it's right, and it's actually what people supposedly want. You'd only have community if you know the people there. You know, you think about it, if you lived in the dorms for, I don't know why you would, but if you lived in one of our dorms for 4 years in the same room, you might be in the same room, but what can you tell me about the people living in the rooms around you every year? They're moving in and moving out. They're not going to be the same people. So you don't have that stability. You're not going to build that same sense of community, which is based on social networking, because you don't have the social network. And of course, in the 21st century, especially post-COVID, you could argue that people's social network is so digital now that maybe they're not even going to be interested in learning who their neighbors are that live next to the house next to them, because they're spending so much of their time on the digital. They're not interested necessarily in walking next door and talking, especially now, walking next door and trying to talk to your neighbor. They're probably not going to be too thrilled about that, because they, for all you might be positive. So this whole idea of community, which is a hugely important concept in America, in the world we live in right now. Americans are absolutely convinced that they don't live in communities, but that they want to live in communities. It's the great itch that they want to scratch. And they're willing to pay a lot of money to live in something like this, but they don't really know what it is because they haven't had it. And in most cases, they don't really want it to constrain their lifestyle. Which means that basically, irregardless of what these guys designed, it's not going to work the way they say it's going to work, because guess what? The people in it aren't going to play the game the way they want them to. So, and of course, these guys know this. They're not stupid. They know exactly what's up. Why the state bought into it's another question, but that just sort of is what it is. So in that concept, let's go back here. If you're studying Coleridge and why people buy into it, would you say it's a functional argument or a phenomenological argument? Is buying Coleridge functional for Peyton? He's got the money. And think about that. You have to understand things, for example, things like taxes. Is it a good idea to own a house in the United States if you're making a lot of money? Sure, it's your major tax deduction. So if he has a lot of money, his accountant, assuming he's making enough money to have an accountant, his accountant's going to say buy a house or buy something, because then the money you put into it, you can deduct from your taxes. So he buys a place. So at that point, you could argue it's actually functional because it allows him to keep more of his income. Also, if he buys into a place that's got, you know, it's new and it's fairly attractive, what can he assume in 3 or 5 years? He's decided he's going to move. What can he assume if he sells the place he bought 4 years ago? We'll say he bought that tiny house for $300,000. And that was in 2017. It's now 2022, and he's going to sell it. What is he assuming is going to have happened between 2017 and 2022? He's going to assume that the house is worth the same or more. So this is especially true in here in Hawaii. A huge part of the population that buys homes here, including especially people from out of state, especially Asians, Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, especially Koreans and Chinese right now, buy anything they can get their hands on here in Hawaii because they're convinced that the value will go up. So it's just like an investment. It's just like buying stocks or gold or whatever. So you don't even buy it. In many cases, you never even live in it. There's one of the units in our little subdivision that was bought up 6 months ago and no one's ever moved in. And they made it very clear they were going to keep it on the market, and 9 months they're going to sell, and they plan to make a profit. So they never had any intention to move in. They just had someone clean the house. They're going to have no one, I assume, clean the house when they sell it. But they don't actually see it as a place to reside in. It's just a financial investment which turns into something else. So in that situation, that's sort of functional. But on the other hand, the scary part of this is assuming that the value is going to go up isn't necessarily accurate. That's based on a whole set of ephemerals which you generally can't keep track of. So functionalism sort of explains why you have developments like Koa Ridge. But on the other hand, if you think about the development itself, the big word they were using was community. And what's the problem with the word community, which is sort of like the word perfect? Is community something you can measure? Yeah, you can't measure it. You can't say, oh, this is 60% community and some other places 40%. I mean, what the hell do you mean? So you've got a weird situation from a geographer's point of view. When you look at something like a subdivision, there's a whole mess of different factors sort of working there at the same time. This is very typical what happens when you're doing geography. It's a very complicated scenario because people are making a bunch of decisions based on a bunch of mutually different types of information they're taking in, which all then shape the choice that they make. So when you're looking at geographer's use of theory, geographer's use of these type of assessments, it's within the context that much of what we look at is very complicated. And unlike most disciplines, for example, if you're in psychology or sociology or something like that, you generally will use one theoretical approach. So if you're a particular type of psychologist, the particular approach you use is pretty much what you use for everything. Geographers almost never do that. Most geographers use a bunch of different approaches, especially if they're looking at something complicated, because one approach won't give you the solution to explaining what you see that you're looking for. And so to a certain extent, when you look at something like Koa Ridge, it's very typical of what geographers do. If you think about it, this place is a landscape. They sell it as a landscape. They're selling the idea that when you purchase something, you're purchasing a landscape. You're purchasing an ideal. You're purchasing a dream to a certain extent. Segue back here. A dream home. Semantics are absolutely fascinating. You're not purchasing, and in fact, when you get back to it, I think I mentioned this before, so I can't pause this thing. Why don't they use the word house here? Notice how they say home styles, dream home. Why don't they use the word house? Semantically in English, they're synonymous. Even here, oops, yeah, for every home sold. Why don't you see the word house? In fact, you don't even see it up here. You see the homes. In 2020 American English, what's the difference between the word house and the word home? Because I mean, for example, yeah, go
Well,
ahead.
home kind of has the connotation of like the community, right? Or like a family kind of
Yeah, if you think
feel.
about it, if I asked you guys could all tell me where home is. Now, for many of you, especially as college students, I can almost guarantee it's not where your house is. It's got an emotional, there's all sorts of other baggage attached to the word home that isn't in house. So what would happen if their slogan was find your dream house? Why would I fire that person that developed this website if that's what they put there? Again, the reason is this image. Are these people buying a house? Let's go back to this. Wait, what happened to it? I lost it. Oh, there it was. Oh, I can't find it. Oh, there it is. Are they buying a house? They're buying a home. Why is this image supposed to imply a home? Why do all these images imply home, the word home in English? You can see this with their expressions. It's like Peyton said, what you've got is an emotional attachment to it. You want to sell something because you want to sell someone a home. When you get into development, in fact, I think, didn't they have that here? They had the inside somewhere. What is in here? Oh, crap, I can't find it now. Somewhere I actually had the image. Oh, that's where it is here. Okay, these are a real good example. We do this. I do this in my interior design class. See if we can actually pop one of these suckers up. Oh, there we go. So here we've got a house. Okay, we'll say this is a house that you're trying to sell. In fact, my wife does. They used to do this. She does this a little bit. This is what I call. There's a particular branch of interior design, which is dealing with basically realtors. So if I'm an interior designer and I'm setting this place up, what have I got to be very careful to do? We'll say that Montserrat's looking at this place, she's thinking of buying it. So she comes in here. I've got sort of two edges that I've got to work between. What happens if I don't have anything, if it's totally bare? What's she going to have a hard time visualizing? Because remember, what I want her to do is I want her to come in here and say, oh, I love this place here. You know, here's a check or here's my bank statement and here's $400,000, it's mine now. That's what I want her to do. I don't think she's going to do it, but you know, this is what I want. So what happens if the place is totally empty, doesn't even have curtains? Why is it going to be a hard sell if I'm the realtor?
You can't visualize like actually living and interacting with
Yeah, it's
the
too
house.
sterile. It's like a storage. It's like it's like going to Hawaii storage. It looks like a self-storage container with windows. What happens if I do the opposite? If I have a couple of kids' toys, a chewed dog toy, you know, we've got our Xbox over here, so we got the players up here. There's a half-open box of chips and some other stuff here. And it looks like everyone just left 5 minutes ago. Why is that actually going to be equally bad? Peyton was exactly right. In one case, it's too sterile. What's the problem you have if you go the other way? Again, this is this idea of home. If you open the door and she comes into that, what's she feel like she's doing?
Someone else's home.
It's someone else's home she's intruding. what you want to, if you're a realtor and you're trying to sell this, and this is actually not a bad job of this particular branch of interior design, is they call it prepping oftentimes, is you want this to look really comfortable, because you want her to come in here and think, oh, that looks really comfortable. I could sit down there, hey, I like these colors. Oh, this is really nice. In fact, if you do a really good job, my wife is really good at this. When people buy a place, they'll oftentimes ask if they can buy the furniture that's all in it because it works so well. So you want it to come in, you don't want it to be someone else's home, but you don't want it to be a sterile house. You want her to open the door, come in here and think, wow, I could live here. This is really nice. It looks really comfortable. And if you've done that right, and that's why you get paid a lot if you're this type of interior designer, then you've scored. Because you want to make that effort for her to move from a place being a house. You want her to be able to see it as her home with as little as effort as possible, because there's a bigger chance that you'll be able to sell it to her. See, I think what happened. How come I can't switch to another image? Now, if you notice, why don't they have bedrooms in here then? Oh, this is even better. It's actually something my wife might do. This is actually really, really clever. Okay, Montserrat and Josiah both are looking at this house. They're both thinking of buying this place. I'd say the interior designer did a really, really good job here. Now, on one hand, they've got, we'll assume these are probably silk flowers, but anyways, it doesn't look too bad. They've got mixed chairs, different types of chairs. Now, what did they do up here that's actually really clever? What's on the counter here? It's three place settings. But notice how there's no food out or anything else that would be distracting from it. So what they want you guys to do when you walk in here is they want to visualize, oh, I could sit down here and have breakfast and it would look just like this and da-da-da-da-da. It doesn't look like anyone actually lives in here like it's a mess. But you want to make it as low as an effort for someone to actually visualize being their home. This is actually a big part of what geographers do in some areas like mine, is you try to turn something that's a strange or different into something that can be part of your world. So again, you're using perception to manipulate the way that she sees this environment. So the environment is not something that's different that she's never experienced before. If you've done a good job at something close enough, she can visualize herself being in this. It's part of the world she could live in. And if you do a good job, she'll buy it. So geography occurs at all sorts of scales. It can occur at the level of a subdivision. It can occur at the level of an island, the level of kayaks on a beach. It can even occur within a room. But it's all dealing with the same thing, which is a combination of perception and reality. And when you go to buy this place, I can guarantee it's not going to include this stuff. But this stuff might have been critical for why someone actually bought the place, ironically. And when they move in, it just seems sort of empty. You know, because they thought they were buying this image of home. And so notice the complexity between even not just the semantic words, house and home, but the way that we actually use them and the choices we make. I mean, someone's thinking of dropping probably $500,000 down, which in many cases is going to be based on whether you've got bowls and a fake thing of silk flowers on the table. It's not based on some pragmatic measurement of financial status and investment rates and something like that. It's based on an entirely emotive decision or choice. And as we'll see, this is a huge part of how people decide and use their landscapes, is based on emotion and choice. Okay, so now I've just terrified you guys with real estate. Any last questions or comments on this? We all good to go? Okay. Yeah, I guess we're all set. I guess I'll see you guys Tuesday then, yeah, because today's Thursday. Today better be Thursday. It is, right? Okay. So they had a flashback. I was saying it was Tuesday and lost today. Okay. So in that case, I guess I'll see you guys on Tuesday next week. Same time, sort of same place. Okay. Oh, I don't know. Did you guys get the email that they're now postponing? They're not going to start sit down in classes till the 5th of October. Did you guys get that? Okay, just as an FYI in case you didn't. Okay. So I guess with that, I'll see you guys next week. Have a good weekend. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.